Celebrate the incredible women transforming the game of cricket. Metrobank are proud to honour 3 amazing leaders through the Metrobank Champion of Girls Cricket Award, from Anna Davies at Chichester Priory Park Cricket Club to Emma Williams at Manford Cricket Club and Sarah John at Sefton Park Cricket Club. These women are accelerating action and driving gender equality forward. Check out their stories in the episode description. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got a bit of a different show for you today. Myself and Ben Gardner will be talking all things World Cup qualifier action later on, and I also caught up with Georgia Elwiss earlier in the week to chat about her experiences of playing and being coached by New England head coach Charlotte Edwards. But first, a couple of weeks back, I spoke to high performance manager of Australia women, Shawn Flegler. In the aftermath of the Ashes, we wanted to drill down into what makes Australia the best side in the world, from their initial investment into the women's cricket pathway, all the way up into how they groom their players for success today. Flegler has been in his role as performance manager for 11 years and is also the chair of the selection committee. In between clips from the interview we did, you'll hear myself and Lauren Winfield-Hill discussing the key talking points, breaking down what he says into the key discussion areas and how the development model that's made Australia so successful can be emulated. First up, I spoke to Shawn on what went into establishing the current Australian player pathway and streamlining national selection, and the tangible impact the introduction of the WBBL had on grassroots participation numbers.
Yeah, I mean, at a grassroots level, there's been a huge increase, in the sort of 5 to 12-year-old entry-level programs. So I think, in the last 5 years, it's pretty much doubled the amount of girls playing the game. So about 15,000 girls playing the game in 2019, up to about 30,000 this year. So that's been great to see. From a domestic point of view, I think from a professional point of view, there's been a few changes, I guess, over the last decade. We've had the same amount of teams, I guess, so the same amount of players. Obviously, the introduction of the WBBL in 2015 was a big step as well. So that increased the level of contracts, or the number of contracts as well. So you're looking at about 120 contracted players, pretty much at a full-time level now. So obviously the increase in dollars has been the big change. I think that sort of happened around about 2015 as well, with the introduction of WBBL, and then the players being added to the MOU, along with into the men's MOU. So that was the big shift, I think, with as far as dollars were concerned.
By introducing that franchise tournament, but T20 tournament, how did that work, or how difficult was the integration with that alongside Australian state cricket?
It was a big moment, I think. Obviously the men's BBL had been going for a few years, but the decision was made. We wanted to introduce the tournament for the girls, and I think what it did, it shifted or gave opportunities for players to move, and so you had players essentially moving from a couple of strong states, someone like New South Wales, and then you had players moving across the country and playing for the Perth Scorchers and going down to Hobart and playing for the Hurricanes. So I think it essentially spread out the talent across the country. So that was a big shift. And then obviously, you're getting the international players in as well. So, it was the first international T20 competition. So there was a lot of interest in it initially. You had the best international players coming over and playing. That exposed our domestic players to some of those international players as well. But I think it also helped some of the international players being exposed to our systems. We'd started investing quite a bit in our resourcing at a state level as well. So, full-time coaches and Triple SM staff. So, physical coaches, physios, dietitians, psychs. So there was a whole sort of investment that happened at that point. And then you added in WBBL, and you got onto TV. That was a big shift as well. So once the games got onto TV and free to air and the rest, it was that was a big thing. So that started in, I guess, inspiring girls to play the game. Seeing their heroes on TV, that was a big thing for WBBL. Whereas the WNCL games, they weren't on TV. We do have them live streamed now, and there's still some good following. But WBBL was the, I guess, the tournament that we wanted to make really visible. It was a really conscious decision from the organisation that the T20 format was the place where we were really going to grow the game. And it was the same with BBL, trying to introduce new markets to the game, and I think they've done that really well.
Lauren, we've just heard from Cricket Australia High Performance Director of Women's Cricket, Shawn Flegler, about the impact the establishment of the WBBL had on the beginnings of Australia's ascent to be the best side in the world. One thing that stood out to me from our conversation was the emphasis he placed on spreading out the talent in Australia around the country that happened with the WBBL when it started. You've just got back from a pre-season tour with Yorkshire, prepping for Tier 2 after losing several players to Durham and elsewhere this season. It was also announced this week that Steer Callis is going to be playing for Warwickshire for part of this season. When Tier 1's expanded again next year and again the year after, is the concentration of where those top domestic players are in the country something that concerns you, having to recruit for a Tier 1 side next year?
I think we're quite nicely placed because we were very proactive from the announcement. I probably would be more concerned for the following year with somebody like Glamorgan, location-wise and just like structure-wise, and getting enough sort of, top players over there. I don't think it'll be impossible, but I think it is a task that, we were quite lucky in the sense of as soon as we found out the news, it was like, okay, well, how do we, treat this team now like it's a Tier 1 team in terms of how we go about our business, but also recruit and keep people on our books where we're not starting a complete, from ground level when we get to Tier 1. But I do think it's an interesting, actually. It's quite topical. I know it's a different sport, but I was just speaking to our sports psych at Yorkshire, who does some work in rugby league as well. And he was just talking about the women's game in rugby league in terms of all the best players go to the same few teams, but the actual competition itself suffers, which is, I guess that's what you're trying to avoid, isn't it? You want the talent spread. You want a couple of international players at each team and it to be a fair contest every time. And I think that's what we saw a little bit actually over in Australia, where for a long time, New South Wales was so dominant. They pretty much, nobody else bothered turning up because they just won title after title, which is something that they have now seemed to rectify and to, as you say, and as he said, to sort of share the love a little bit.
And we also saw this week the announcement of Susie Bates and Alana King, who are going to be playing for Durham and Lancashire respectively. That also helps to spread out the talent, right, with high-profile international players, well, particularly with Bates going to Durham as well, which isn't somewhere you would think that a lot of the most high-profile players would go. Yeah,
I think it's a really good sign, that the players want to come over and play in the comp. I think there's probably, it's clearly an attractive competition. I know for some players it's quite a nice lead into the 100, and for a lot of the Aussie players it's a bit similar to us. It's the flip of their season, isn't it? So it's quite a nice time to be playing some more games in a different country. But yeah, I think it bodes really well for the comp, the fact that it's attracted some of the best international players. And like you say, some parts are more attractive than others, but the fact that Durham have got somebody of Susie Bates' calibre, I think it's just great for the competition.
It was also interesting hearing Shawn talk about the WNCL and how Cricket Australia's focus has been far more on the WBBL in terms of visibility and in terms of development. Something that's been a key part of the ECB's strategy for Project Darwin has been making the county sides more visible with the 2 teams, 1 club narrative. With your experiences in the WNCL and now with pre-season at Yorkshire, how different or similar is that approach?
I think we're putting equal time and investment into the 100 or the WBBL, the franchise world and the county system. I think you're nothing without your county system, because equally they're the 100 or the WBBL is largely made up of already international cricketers plus overseas. And actually it's the next crop of players that are the important ones of who comes through. And how good your comp is, I think you can, in terms of comparing the WPL to the WBBL, a tongue twister, the 100, is actually the strength of the competition lies within the strength of the domestic players. So I think we're giving it a fair crack at both. I feel like I've hammered this drum a lot, and I feel like I'm in a good place to judge both because I play in both. But I really, I think when England lose, everyone goes, "Oh, the domestic structure is not good enough," and rah rah. And I just think that's a load of garbage. I think the domestic structure over here is very healthy. The volume of games is far superior to in Australia. You just got to get your best players playing in it when they're available, and you've got to make it where, I think the other thing is we've tinkered so much with like the teams, the names, where they're based, this, that, and the other. Is that you've got to make it where people want to play there, like they're desperate to go back and play for their domestic teams. Like I use the Grace Harris example with Queensland. If she's not in the Aussie 50 over stuff, she's on the phone the next day trying to play for Queensland. And that's what you need. I think you want somebody with a real allegiance to a county team where they make the standard better when they're available, they're playing it. But I do think we're investing nicely into both. And I certainly am not a banger of the drum that the structure in the system in Australia is any better. We got drummed in the Ashes, and it's not because of our domestic structure, because I think it's healthier than it's ever been.
Well, in the next part of the conversation, Shawn talks about the experience of younger players coming through the system and earmarking them for higher honours at an early stage. He explicitly references Georgia Voll's timeline into the international side from under 15 levels to Ashes opener at 21 years of age. Here he is now.
In Georgia's example, I mean, she had been involved in our pathway programs. Pretty much from the time she was 15, she'd played state cricket for Queensland in national champs, so under 15s at that stage, and under 18s. And then, we had a CA 11 that played so we'd pick some players out of the under 15 national championships to play in the under 18 national championships. So they were the best sort of young players, and we had Georgia Voll and Phoebe Litchfield playing together in that. So, that was a great sort of development program as well, where they got stretched a little bit at the next level. So, every state has their own youth team. So it's now under 16s and under 19s. So that's a great competition as well. So that national championship happens each year, and they have preparation periods into that. So they train together for a few months leading into the national championships, and from that we select essentially talent squads from that. So we now have something called the Lanning Perry squads, which we introduced a few years ago. We get the best sort of emerging under 19 players together and play some games and a training camp. So we have these, I guess, different programs that we try and find players that we think are going to go on and play at a higher level and try and stretch them in those sort of environments.
Lauren, Shawn just spoke about the competitiveness of state youth cricket in Australia. What does that pathway look like, or that early age pathway look like at a county level for players who are coming through into senior county sides?
I think it's that exposure, isn't it? You want players in pathway systems, EPP, and to have fixtures, with school and getting it in the school holidays and things like that. But I think I think the RDCs worked really well with like those development teams that were under the regional structure. I think if we can aspire to have first team cricket, tier 1 cricket, a second team, and then you're leading into your pathway systems, I think that's a really healthy spot to be in. I know that's something that they obviously do out in Australia, and they put a lot on, the state championships and the underage stuff. It's quite a big deal. Like I know when our Queensland girls, like the under 19s, were going across to Perth, it was a big deal. It's like, oh, it's the under 19s comp, like the best players in the country. And I think you want to make the competition a big deal. And for the players to, I think generally, the players that do well in that come good. So Georgia Voll, Phoebe Litchfield, and there's a picture of those two when they were playing at under 19s level. And I think that's a really important piece, is getting the underage stuff right. I think we've almost like we're working down, aren't we? We've sort of got the England structure, and we've put time and effort into the 100 and the franchise world, and now we're seeing it sort of filter down to this real focus on county cricket. The next step after that is, okay, well, what does second team pathways age group cricket look like? And then beyond that is, the real recreational game. So I think it's just got to keep filtering, really.
Mm. You've spoken quite a lot about Georgia Vol on this podcast. I mean, we've spoken quite a lot about Georgia Vol in general, to be honest, and young Australian players. But one thing the England A Tour in Australia and the captaincy discussion with Grace Scrivens, she captained England in the Under-19 World Cup in 2022 and is now on these A Tours, captains Essex and Sunrisers before that. She's still, she's 20 years old at the minute? What I was thinking was, should there be some kind of streamlining for these players like her who have been earmarked as England players from such a young age? Going back on a little bit of our discussion earlier about Yorkshire players, are those transition points where players are teenagers and moving through these sides, is that somewhere that you think we're kind of falling a little bit behind, especially when thinking about the kind of lack of leadership options for England coming through?
Yeah, I think you want to create leadership opportunities. I think that should be something that's really emphasised across the whole high performance programme. And that doesn't have to be a captain. That can be vice captains. That can be leadership groups. Obviously, England A tours. We used to do, you could do like the best of the rest competition where you do the best of county. You might play 3 games, the best of the county players come together. There's an opportunity to get 3 teams. You got 3 captains. Little things like that where you can do things like that where you unearth new talent, new leaders, etc. I think the other thing is, as well, as Georgia Vol has always spoken about how she was, I know she's only 21, but how she was glad she wasn't thrown in straight away. Like, she's been earmarked for 4 or 5 years as being the next best thing. And actually, her numbers have been good without being great domestically until the last year or so. So, and she spoke, and she spoke quite openly about how actually she's glad she had to earn her stripes and not just be okay in domestic cricket, bang hundreds, have that massive WBBL that she had. Whereas I'm not sure we're expecting the same out of our players. I don't know whether players have really banged the door down domestically before they're getting picked. I think we have a lot of potential chat and not a lot of performance chat. Where I think, I do think they do it differently in terms of they've got very specific things that they're looking for. They want big performances, not okay performances. They want them to be fit and athletic. You look at somebody like Amanda Jade Wellington, who's carved up for years, but she's not ticking enough of the boxes that they want. She's the wicket taker and she's the performance piece. But there's a lot more to it than that from their point of view. So, yeah, I think it is important that players are playing so we can actually see how good people are. Like, the only way you're going to do that is to play lots of games, to put your hand up and perform in lots of different scenarios, lots of different conditions. And I'm just not sure that we've asked that, throughout the last couple of years.
On actually playing, there was a really good game on the England A Tour that we've mentioned over this week. England won by 1 wicket with 4 balls remaining. Australia A scored 195, and then there was a brilliant innings from Paige Schofield, who scored 83 off 102 balls. And the last wicket pair of Grace Potts and Mahika Gore got England over the line just about. So those are the kinds of series that we're talking about in terms of bringing greater experiences to these players coming through, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you look at someone like Paige Schofield, like she's playing well because she's playing a lot of cricket. She'll play 30 games in a season. She's playing the 100. She's playing all the domestic games. Where you look at somebody like Beth Heath, who's barely played any cricket for 2 years. So how is she going to push forward when she's barely playing any cricket? Even Alice Capsey, what she was playing probably a couple of years ago versus what she's played in the last 15, 16 months is significantly less. So I do think the only way to get better and to prove how good you are is to be playing. And the other thing is it obviously strengthens that domestic structure in the games. I think if you do well in games where lots of England players are playing and people are at full strength, clearly that holds a lot more weight than if, you're playing against weakened teams that aren't at full strength.
In the final part of our discussion, Shawn spoke about maintaining that level of elite performance and picked out the importance of having leading figures in the side. It's something we've spoken about when we had Annabelle Sutherland on the show at the start of the WPL. She's part of a group of Australia players in a leadership programme, having been made captain of Melbourne Stars in the WBBL, despite Meg Lanning being in the side.
We invested quite a bit of money, over the last 10 years and leading into, as I said, WBBL and WNCL. So, I think, once you start investing in the game and making sure there's, support available for the players, and then obviously, wages come into it, it becomes a more attractive product. So, broadcast and everyone gets involved then, and you can keep going back into the game. So, I think it's a multi-level thing. There's, and then once you start having success, people want to be a part of that. It becomes really appealing. So, if you're not having success, young players probably, maybe they don't want to play for Australia. But at the moment, we've had a lot of success, and you can see when you go up to national champs and watch those young players come through, they want to be like their heroes, and they're working extremely hard to get to that. So, and you just got to make sure you've got all the resources around for them and provide opportunities through the different programs, whether it's the under-19s now or Australia A programs. So, look to identify those players who you think are going to come through and give them stretch opportunities at the right time.
And how difficult is it sustaining that performance gap as Australia is the best side in the world compared to creating that performance gap over the last 10 years?
Oh, look, it is. I think it's very hard to sustain elite performance and making sure you're number one. I think when you're striving to be number one, it's pretty clear that's the goal, and there's someone there, and you can look to replicate that, or I guess copy people sometimes. But when you're at number one for a long time, it takes a lot of focus, I think, to stay there, and you've got to keep finding motivation to stay there. You've got to manage some expectations and scrutiny, I think, and then every team is chasing you. So every game is, there's pressure there to win. You've got every team who are trying to knock you off. So I think, there's some physical fatigue and mental fatigue about trying to stay number one as well. But, that's why you put in the work and why we have all the support around players. At some point, when some players get to that stage of their career and they don't have that motivation and hunger, that's when players finish, essentially. So once you realise you've hit that, that's the time where, because if you can't just get up and go again and get up in the morning and train like you can, that's a pretty good sign that you're done. But we're fortunate we've just had these players just come in. They've kept driving excellence, players like Ray Chains and Meg Lanning. A few years ago, they just had, they were great role models. And so when new players come into the environment, they see how they train and their dedication and, their focus. And it's just, once you have that environment and people want to be the best, it's a pretty cool thing to be part of. So it's just, I guess, trying to manage that and maintain it. But it's certainly, I think it's harder to stay at the top rather than trying to get to the top.
Laura, we've spoken a lot about the England captaincy in the last few weeks and months, and at the time of recording, we are still awaiting a captaincy announcement from the ECB. Maybe that'll still be the way when this goes out, not entirely sure. We've spoken a lot about how England have found themselves in the position they're in, with really only one or two obvious candidates for the captaincy. Outside of the domestic setup and bringing new leaders through, how does this England side make sure they're not in that position again?
Well, I think it's the same way in which you're trying to improve the performances at England level. So, Charlotte Edwards has spoken about her philosophy, the direction that she wants to go in, and how important that is filtering down to the domestic teams. This is the direction I want. I want people to win games. I want them to be match winners. We've got to work on our physicality. And you got to go, well, I want some leaders, domestic structures, county structures. Let's have let's get a leadership program in. Let's go to other sports, go and spread your wings. Like, can we do courses? Can we go to other sports, see what great leaders in other sports has done? Like, think outside the box. And it doesn't have to just be in cricket. You don't just have to learn from people in the same sport. You can learn from lots of different spaces, but I think there just needs to be an emphasis on it from top to bottom, and that can stem to the county structures. A lot of it often depends on the coaching, in terms of what they believe in, and the high performance team that probably sits above Lottie is generally that's what gets worked on, whatever they think is the direction of travel. So and it's about getting that filtered down, getting head coaches of counties on board with that sort of stuff. Some people will love that. Some people, like, it just wouldn't be on their radar as a head coach. But I think if everybody sort of agrees that English cricket needs to, pay a little bit of attention to the leaders and the leadership programs in the country, then it should be something that's sort of prioritised at county level as well. I just think it's so different as well. Like, it's so different to other sports. Like, if you're a captain of a rugby team or a football team, or even of a golf team or a tennis team, like, you actually don't influence that much. Whereas cricket, like, the leadership and the tactical side of cricket is, like, so important, so at times undervalued. But then when you get it right, people, you go down as a legend of the game. You look at Owen Morgan. I know it's a male example, but no one really remembers him. It sounds really, like, bad, but nobody really remembers him as standout innings or match-winning knocks to a degree, but they remember him as an incredible leader for England. And I think cricket's got a real unique opportunity because it does have such an impact on the success of your team, and also, like, that direction of travel and the way in which the team plays and where they're heading, which is so different to any other sport.
Well, what makes a good captain in that regard then? Because if you look at a character like Alyssa Healy, she's a very different character to someone like Meg Lanning, who in themselves is quite a different character to some of the men's examples that you've seen, or someone like Harmanpreet Kaur, who captains India. So what makes a good captain despite being different characters?
Well, I think you're only as good as the group that you mold with the group that you've got. Like, if you need a lot of energy and that, like, emotional rev, and probably somebody like a Harman's going to give you that. Someone like a Meg Lanning probably isn't, but Meg Lanning's the tactician. Alyssa Healy's probably more of the energy and the chirping away and driving the team. Probably less of a tactician than Meg Lanning was. So I think you've got to be whatever your team needs, and I think that's and in cricket, like, the tactical side of the game is obviously massive. Like, that probably goes without saying that you need to read the game well, read key moments well, and know what's required. But it's about understanding the group that you're working with and being what they need. If you've got a bunch of introverts, then you're going to have to bring some energy. If you've got a bunch of extroverts, you can be like that, silent assassin. So I think it's about being, as well, it's like there's so much to it, isn't it? It's like, if you're a really successful team like the Aussies, then you're continuing a legacy. That might look different to rebuilding a team. So I don't know if there's, like, one size fits all. But I certainly think it's a place that's been neglected in English women's cricket, and I think I just think it's a hugely important role in the sport in general.
I guess there's also different types of captaincy, right? So one thing I was thinking about when thinking about this episode was if you look at the WPL, you've got Ash Gardner, Alyssa Healy, Meg Lanning, they've all held captaincy positions, but we're not making England players sought after for those kinds of positions. And there's a difference between coming into a franchise for 6 weeks and taking on a captaincy role of a national side or even a regional side, right?
Yeah, definitely. But the fact that, like, you know, and Ash Gardner hasn't captained an awful lot, but is seen as a captain in the WPL, you know, and Talia McGrath is similar. She's obviously, you know, she's done a lot of her groundwork at Adelaide and at South Australia. But I think we've spoken about it before. Is like this whole like Belinda Clark leadership mentoring course, you know, workshops or whatever they have there. Is these girls are on that program and earmarked for, you know, future leadership positions. I'm not sure that exists in England, or is something that is, I reckon you can see from like a 13, 14, 15-year-old who's got leadership potential, and we should be getting them and working with them. So then when they're under 19s, when they're under, you know, then they go to senior level, like they know, you know, who they are, what they're doing, and they know that they've got the potential to be a leader. I think sometimes, like, some of the girls, even just in the UAE, like, we pass the captaincy around a lot and they're like, oh God, I've not captained before. I don't know how I'm going to go. It's like, well, we need people to have those experiences and to know that they can do it.
Well, the person tasked with creating those leaders at England level and first and foremost appointing a New England captain is Charlotte Edwards, who told the media last week she had a pretty clear idea of who that person would be. A week on from her appointment as head coach, I spoke to Georgia Elwiss, who played with Edwards for England and was coached by her at Southern Vipers. We spoke about what makes Edwards such an effective leader. Georgia, before we get on to Charlotte Edwards as a coach, you made your England debut under her captaincy. What was the environment in the England side like at that time in 2011?
It's a long time ago now. I mean, I was walking into a team that had Charlotte Edwards as the captain. We had Isha Gua, Lydia Greenway, Catherine Brunt. So there were a lot of big names there. Pretty daunting, really, for me. I think I was only 19 when I came into the setup. Claire Taylor was around, Sarah Taylor. So like massive names, people who I'd really looked up to. And I remember thinking, like, I've got a lot of work to do if I want to stay here, because they just had this aura about them. Lottie especially, she's the captain, she led from the front. And I think having that core group of players sort of gave you something to aspire to, and they led the way in terms of their professionalism, how they worked, how they trained, and all of that sort of thing.
And we're talking about the era just before professionalism came in, when you made your England debut. When that first tranche of central contracts came in 2014, I think it was, how did that environment then change at that point, still under Edwards' captaincy?
I think we were very aware then that there was going to be a lot more scrutiny. We spoke about it a lot as a group, that all of a sudden now we were going from something that we loved doing as a hobby to something that we were getting paid for, and it was a job. And were there going to be more expectations on us from the media, from the public, and all of that sort of thing? I think behind the scenes, like on the day-to-day sort of running of the England team, we probably had a bit more time together as a squad. So we'd meet up at Loughborough a lot more, time on task, making sure that we were, you know, living up to that professional name. I mean, the salaries certainly weren't anything to shout about at that time, but it was more the shift in, I think, from the ECB acknowledging that we were turning professional and they wanted to give us more money. So, you know, did that mean that then we had to give more back in terms of results, performances, how hard we trained, how much we trained, and all of that sort of thing? And I think it just sort of evolved over a period of time as we got used to it as players, as well, as much as anything.
And what was Edwards' leadership like behind closed doors at that point? What was she like as a captain in the dressing room?
Very much led by example. She was a sort of no-nonsense kind of leader. Somebody who spoke very openly and honestly about the team, what she expected. It was, you know, she sort of was probably the leading run scorer in most of the tours that I was on. So you could see that her desire to win and her desire to winning an England shirt was, the thing that everything was focused around, getting the best out of her and her ability. Just demanded high standards from all of her players. And I think that's how, I'll remember her as a captain, just being so passionate about the England shirt and winning games of cricket for England.
When Charlotte Edwards spoke to the media last week after she was announced as England head coach, she said that she felt she was a better coach than she was a captain. Is that something that you'd agree with, or is there any difference there that you can point to?
I think my relationship with her certainly has been better when she's been the coach. I think I was a player that was on the fringes of the squad a lot, and so was always sort of dipping in and out, and that made it difficult to create a really good relationship with some of the senior players, just because I was in and out of the environment a lot. I was a young player. But certainly over the last few years, we have developed a fantastic relationship, and I can see, sides of her as a coach that she just thinks about everything, thinks about the person first, knows the person more than she knows the cricketer, and she knows the cricketer incredibly well. And so I think she's just developed as a human being and is the perfect fit now for this England side. I think I can't speak highly enough of her as a coach from what I've been involved with in teams with her. And I think that she's got a lot of work to do, but I think she's the perfect person to take it all on.
Something that I've heard when I've spoken to other people about, or a word that I've heard mentioned about Edwards as a captain specifically, is intensity. Would that be the right word to use?
I guess in a way, she everything that she did, she demanded the highest standards of herself and those around her. Especially, within training, she made drills that we did look super easy, and I think that sometimes was a bit daunting for me as a young player, thinking, how am I ever going to be, up to the same sort of standards as she is? But what she certainly was passionate and wanted those standards for everybody throughout that England side, and wanted it to mean as much to her playing for England like to everybody else. So I can definitely see that. I can see that she's going to take on the reins and put the England shirt back on, and deal with it in a very similar way, because playing for England means everything to her and meant everything to her. So I think that she'll be a very proud coach now of England.
And something that we've alluded to is that you spent a lot of time at Southampton under Edwards' coaching regime as well. What was that environment like at the Vipers under her leadership?
One of the best environments I've ever been involved in. Going into it, I was going in as a senior player, so a little bit different for me. I'd probably grown as a player and learned how to speak my mind and how to have difficult conversations. But I remember even the first conversation I had with her about coming down, and she wanted to know how it would fit around my lifestyle, what they could do for me, and know more about me as a person before what I could bring as a cricketer. And I think being valued and felt like having that sense of belonging was one of the things that she really created with every single member of her squad. And then she's just got this aura about her, and created a culture where the culture ran itself and the players drove that culture, and she could just sort of sit above it and oversee it all happening, drive the cricket forward, because obviously her cricket knowledge is just second to none. It's scarily freakish how often she'll predict what's going to happen the next ball of a game or what shot somebody's going to play. It's nuts. But I think even just being able to sit next to her and soak up her cricket knowledge was one thing, but her care and her attention to absolutely every single detail of her players and her staff is what I think sets her apart from any other coach that I've worked with.
And you started in that environment at the start of Edwards' coaching journey pretty much, and then at the end of it she's had all these experiences with Mumbai Indians and in the WBBL and in the 100. Have you noticed a difference in how she coaches compared to the start of her time in charge?
No, to be honest, no. I think she probably has learned quite a lot over that. I mean, it's hard to keep up with her resume, but she's very consistent, and I think that also is something that players really respect and really look for. Somebody who is consistent in their just ways of being, like towards players, towards staff, whether you're in the 11 or not. The honesty that she I think she finds it difficult. We all find it difficult to have those honest conversations, but she does it, and she puts herself out there, and she can speak really matter-of-factly, but the communication is just so good with her. And I think she's probably learned a huge amount from different environments working around the world, but in terms of from what I've seen from her from day one, like she's just been such a carer, and obviously then her cricket knowledge speaks for itself.
I did an interview with Charlotte on the sidelines of Vipers training last year on Hampshire Media Day, and in her own words, she was constantly looking away from the microphone, trying to get an eye on you guys. And in her own words, she's a stickler for timing and not wasting time. Is that an accurate kind of impression of how she runs a training session?
Yeah. If you're late, you know about it. But she just thinks about everything. So even in terms of like the planning, the detail that goes into the planning, she'll know before people turn up how many overs they're bowling, what sort of stage of an injury they're on when they're coming back, whether a player has maybe been dismissed to spin, so that's what they'll want to work on that session. She just knows. She knows it, like she's just across absolutely everything, everybody in the squad, players and staff, even the youngsters coming through. And when she plans something, if you're not there when the session starts, you get in trouble. But I think that's the way it should be, and I think that it sets a precedent really for the way that you go about things. But equally, having said that, she's brilliant at then if like it rains midway through the session, she's got a contingency plan. So it's like she's got this amazing ability to have so much structure, but also be able to adapt to whatever is thrown at us. And I think that's why we were able to be so successful, because we sort of knew that we didn't have to think about any of that. We could just turn up and do our skills, do our jobs, throw everything out there, and we knew that at the end of the day she cared about us as people first and foremost, and that was the most important thing to her. And I think that's a really genuine thing that people will say about her, and it's so true.
You kind of alluded to it, but I was going to ask about the Vipers. Obviously, the Vipers were the most successful side of the regional period. There was obviously a lot of very good players in that setup, but how much of a difference on top of that playing ability did Edwards' leadership make to being that successful?
Yeah, I mean, we speak about how many players have come through the system there that have been homegrown. If you think you've got Lauren Bell, Maya Boucher, Freya Kemp, just ones that I think of off the top of my head. But then you've got other players coming through that have been there a number of years and performed at domestic level for a long period of time. But I think what she does is she creates this culture and this atmosphere where you feel a part of something that's bigger than you, and wearing the Vipers badge is something that's a really proud moment. But I think she also sort of demands those standards without having to say it. She knows what wins games of cricket more often than not, and she just drills that home to the girls until they're living and breathing it as well. And I think it's definitely something that she's embedded. And I think then when you're around her all the time and you can just pick her brains, she'll come out with these little nuggets of information and you just hold on to them. She's somebody ultimately that you want to play for and you want to perform for. So I think she'll be greatly missed at Hampshire, but I think it's England's game.
How much of a difference does it have having a coach who is a female as a female player compared to having a coach who is a male?
I think for her, I mean, she's been there and she's done that, so she knows what it's like. She knows what it means to be playing for England. She's seen the transition of the game from when she first started playing right through to now. So she's been in those shoes and she's lived and she's breathed it, and she's one of the best that's ever played the game. So of course, when she speaks, you're going to listen. Whether it's because she's female or not, difficult to know, but she's obviously had those experiences because she's played in the female game and has been on that journey as well. And, she's just a massive advocate for women's cricket, which also really helps. And she knows what's going to drive the game forward because she lives and breathes it. So I think there probably is an element to it that she's been there and she's done that. And automatically then you can kind of stand up and respect that because she's walked where you have as well.
Do you think there's an element of, particularly with discussions around fitness, that in a women's side it's easier for a female head coach to have those conversations around player fitness than it would be for a male head coach?
Potentially. I think, Lottie would also say herself, like, she probably wasn't the fittest in the squad when she was playing. She struggled with her knees, especially towards the back end of her career. But what she won't settle for is below par standards. And I think that comes from her as a person, the way she played the game. But I think anybody who comes into that sort of role within female athletes has got to tread very carefully around it because of it being such a sensitive subject. And I think she'll manage to find the balance. I think we knew at Vipers what our minimum standards were. And if you weren't there, it wasn't that you got told off for it. It was, right, well, how can we help you improve that? And it was, let's give you, 6 to 12 months to see improvements. And if we're not, then we'll sit down again and discuss why we're not. So it was more of that arm around the shoulder, the care, how can we improve this, rather than this is what you must be. This is, like a strict sort of regime. So I'm hoping that she'll do that in her own way, and the England girls can respond well to it.
Lastly, kind of on Edwards, what were your initial reactions when you found out that she was going to be the England head coach?
It was just a matter of time. I think I knew I was waiting for the notification on my phone for days and days leading up to it, because I just thought that there would be no better person that could do the job. And I think everything had sort of aligned. She'd won the title with Mumbai Indians, and it was kind of like, right, is that her franchise? It's ticked off now. She's done so much in that sort of space. Is this the right time for her to move and make the step up? And she obviously felt like it was, and so did the ECB. So delighted for her. I think she'll leave a massive hole at Hampshire, but I think, their loss will be England's gain. And I honestly don't think there's a better person suited for the job.
For the final part of this week's show, I'm joined by Ben Gardner to round up all the action from the World Cup qualifier, which got underway in Lahore on Wednesday. Just before we get into that, however, as I discussed with Lauren, there have been some high-profile overseas domestic signings in England this week, with Susie Bates joining Durham and Alana King available later in the season for Lancashire. Since recording with Lauren, however, it's been announced that Elise Perry will be joining Hampshire. She'll be available for 6 T20 Blast matches and 2 one-day cup games, as well as Blast Finals Day should Hampshire qualify. There's a great video that I think you should check out going round of Hampshire Director of Women's Cricket Adam Carty unveiling Perry's Hampshire shirt on the balcony at Utilita Bowl Lion King style, which is quite fun. Very briefly, Ben, those names are huge for the first season of a restructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it just underlines that this pathway, this restructure, it is obviously about the quality of the cricket played and can it improve the England women's team, but it's also just about creating a product that people are going to want to go and watch, which not enough people were doing of the regional stuff. And now you've got these big players being signed. You've got just a fanfare being made about them, and it's really, really, really exciting. I haven't yet gone down through all of the tier 1 sides and picked out what I think their first 11s will be, and therefore who I think is the strongest. So it's hard for me to say that this is going to be transformative for Hampshire or Lancashire's hopes or what have you. But it is bottom line, having the best players in the world playing in English cricket, and also then having the best England players as well playing in that as well. It is just going to be a step up on what we've had before throughout the summer, rather than just for a window in the 100.
Well, that's the point, right? We've talked about England players having or needing to be available for the regional domestic county structure for so long, and in addition to making those players more available, if you add into that those kinds of names, that makes a very strong county setup. But on to the World Cup qualifier, which is happening in Lahore at the minute. There's been quite a lot gone on already. As an outline for the tournament, West Indies, Pakistan, Ireland, Scotland, Thailand and Bangladesh are all competing for the last 2 positions in the main World Cup, which will be later this year. So the 2 sides finishing at the top of a round-robin group stage will be the ones who qualify for that. On the opening day of the tournament, Scotland beat West Indies in the second match of the competition in a thrilling finish, which we'll get onto in a minute. Firstly, Ben, could you explain why ahead of this tournament we were thinking it would be so close? Because most people will hear those sides and think, well, West Indies are dead certs, Pakistan are also at home and probably should go through. But we were saying before that this could be a really close tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of just because you've got at least 5 teams there. We'll come to Thailand later, but 5 teams who you just think would all just be pretty strong. I guess particularly when you add into Pakistan and West Indies, you've got Bangladesh who actually almost qualified for the World Cup outright. New Zealand just about managed to squeak in, but Bangladesh, if they'd taken a game off West Indies, I think would have been would have seen through, and they've had some really good results, and they have put together the performance of the tournament in beating Thailand. Pakistan a bit of a lower ebb, so but then also West Indies without Deandra Dottin coming into this, so that obviously just weakens them, and they look not far off a one-woman team basically. And then Scotland have obviously shown what they can do in qualifying for that T20 World Cup, and Ireland have always been kind of there or thereabouts in these things. I've been at some of these qualifying events before, and you've had sort of, especially because those have often been for the last 2 places in a 10-team tournament for T20 World Cups, you've had kind of 4 really strong teams, and then the rest who are kind of not making up the numbers. These are really valuable experiences for them, but they're not hugely troubling the later stages. Whereas with this, you wouldn't be totally. I think everyone can beat anyone. I would be very surprised if any team goes. Well, yeah, I'd be surprised if any team goes through it without losing a game, and that's kind of already played out. I mean, even though the result of the tournament has been that Scotland win over West Indies, Ireland came were not far off beating Pakistan and on that opening day, and now on today's day of fixtures as well, those are also looking pretty closely contested too. Scotland picking up another big batting performance with Catherine Bryce, who is, in terms of a country's story in cricket, is like just a foundational figure. She's the WG Grace of Scottish women's cricket, isn't she? In terms of without her, like almost Scotland's push for full membership. Obviously, the men's side has done some things, but Scotland's push for full membership is almost just founded on her and some of the extraordinary things that she's done, and she's doing it again in this tournament, which is great to see.
I think also the format of this tournament, so it's just a round robin stage, there's no final. I don't necessarily like there not being a final, but it also feels like it's almost like there's less chance for stuff to go wrong, so you've got to sustain that performance over a lesser period of time, which feels like it could mean it's anybody's tournament more than these qualifiers have been before. On that Scotland-West Indies game, so Scotland won an absolute thriller in their first match against the West Indies. Hayley Matthews scored a century and went down with cramp. She was stretchered off the pitch at one point. She came back on the pitch when West Indies lost their 9th wicket. It was an incredible finish.
Well, yeah, I mean, so just trying to outline exactly what happened. So she retired hurt twice. The first time she was off for like a little bit of time, and you think like, okay, she's going to come back when they're 8 or 9 down. It's when they're 8 down that she comes back, and this is an extraordinary passage of play. So they lose a wicket to go 8 down. She had previously retired hurt when she was on 95, so she comes back out, hits her first ball for 4 to move to 99, but then gets an even worse bout of cramp than the first time. That's when she's stretched it off. She's getting sort of pats from all the Scotland players saying like, well played, what an unfortunate thing, but also obviously secretly they're kind of all happy that they're seeing the back of her. Scotland then West Indies then lose a wicket next ball. So in the space of 3 balls, they've kind of lost 3 batters, you'd think, and you'd think that's game over with her having just been stretched off literally 1 ball before, about 6 seconds before. And all of a sudden she walks back out, and then actually West Indies, because the other thing is that although it's then a last wicket pair, it's actually her and the number 8, I think, Alia Elaine. So it's someone who can bat basically. So actually, now that Hayley Matthews has discovered a new set of calves and hamstrings from somewhere, the runs are flowing again. And actually, before that last wicket falls, you think like this really could happen. And it's only an 11 run margin in the end. But yeah, an absolutely astonishing finish, and also just obviously underlines how good Hayley Matthews is. I think the best stat that underlines it is from Hypercourse on Twitter, who is well worth following if you haven't already. I think we mentioned him quite a lot on this podcast. But so she became the first player in ODI history, men's or women's, to take 4 wickets and score 100 in a game that her side lost. And that is just about the most Hayley Matthews a stat can be, isn't it?
And you always forget she took 4 wickets because of what happened next.
Yeah.
But pretty sure she's probably also one of the first people to retire hurt twice and then be not out at the end of the innings, right?
True, yeah.
I also kind of think if you're stretched off, there should be some kind of rule. I mean, it was a great finish, but if you're stretched off, how are you then allowed to come back out to bat? Because it was properly like Glenn Maxwell type stuff when he collapsed on the pitch in the World Cup. But yeah, it was a great finish. We mentioned them a bit earlier, but we should also talk briefly about Thailand, who lost to Bangladesh yesterday in their first game of the tournament. They lost that match by 178 runs and were bowled out for 93. There were 2 fifers for Bangladesh in that game, so Fahima Katan and Janatul Ferdus both took 5 wickets, and Thailand were bowled out within 29 overs. A lot of people will hear the name Thailand as a side and think that they're the rank outsiders for this tournament, and in some ways they are, but they've actually had a really interesting and potentially unjust journey over the last few years that could have turned out really differently. They played their first ODI against India in 2017 and then ended up beating Sri Lanka in the T20 version of the Asia Cup the following year, which was their first victory over a 4-member side. They then qualified for the 2020 T20 World Cup in Australia and put in a strong batting performance against Pakistan before rain brought an end to that game, so they could have won that game. The real crux of their story, however, happened at the 2021 World Cup Qualifiers, so the last edition of this tournament that's currently going on. They recorded 3 wins from their first 4 matches of the tournament and were leading Group B when a COVID-19 outbreak meant the tournament was called off. The controversial thing is that the 3 places up for grab for the main tournament were then given to Pakistan, West Indies and Bangladesh based on their ODI rankings. Thailand had beaten Bangladesh already in the tournament, and they didn't have an ODI ranking at the time because they didn't have ODI status. So it was a really controversial decision. And for context, no side has ever won 3 out of their first 4 matches in a World Cup qualifier and then not gone on to qualify in the World Cup. So yeah, it was a really controversial and impactful decision that Thailand didn't qualify for that World Cup, because it also meant they then didn't qualify for the Women's ODI Championship, which is how qualification is mainly determined for the Women's ODI World Cup. So it wasn't just that they didn't qualify for the main competition. Thailand were eventually given ODI full member status in 2022. And it's also worth saying that Zimbabwe, who have been given entrance to the Women's Championship for the next edition of that tournament, they played Thailand in a bilateral 3-match ODI competition in 2023, and Thailand beat them 3-0. So that's a lot of information, but it's really that decision has really impacted Thailand from that point on, right?
Yeah, it's a total farce, and people were saying it at the time that this was unjust, that okay, fine, a COVID variant, that we didn't know the severity of it at the time, reasonable to call it off. But as is often the case with women's cricket, is that they took an easy decision in terms of the cost of it, and there would have been ways basically to stage to either resume the qualifying event basically ahead of the World Cup that would be played, and you play out the rest of the games and then you go straight into the World Cup, because they were having to do it under sort of bubble conditions. That would have been a very possible thing that they could have done. And then even if you then have to kind of really fudge the qualification, like not even slightly fudge, like really fudging, like take it from a team who looks like they were going to do it, basically. That's just, Thailand just showed there as well why they should have been invested in rather than basically neglected from that point onwards. So like, yeah, you had a team who, were one of the stories of world cricket, basically, who, in terms of, you look at what they'd achieved in the women's game, say, compared to what Afghanistan had achieved in just the men's game before they got full member status. You have Afghanistan a men's team without a women's team at all. Thailand a very strong women's team comparatively, without a men's team of a similar strength. They really, we should have been talking about, should Thailand be full members, and instead they were basically cut off at the knees, and just a load of baffling decisions that has really set back what had been such a heartwarming story. And I guess the worry is, because you've got some stats there as well, have you, about the actual games that they've played since then?
Yeah, so it's not just, the impactful bit of it wasn't the not qualifying for the main World Cup, it was more the Women's Championship, because we've spoken about it before on this podcast when talking about the Netherlands, that below that Women's Championship, there's no future tours schedule for the teams who aren't in that. So ODI bilaterals or ODI intra-team tournaments only happen when host boards are able to arrange them. So before that match against Bangladesh that Pakistan lost yesterday, they hadn't played an ODI in almost 2 years. So the last time they played an ODI was in July 2023. And before that game yesterday, they played 10 ODIs in total since being awarded full ODI status, they'd only lost one of those games. So it's like on performance, they're performing really well. And on the Zimbabwe thing about Zimbabwe being added to the Women's Championship next year, they're currently ranked 14th in the ICC's Women's ODI rankings, whereas Thailand are ranked 9th. It just, anywhere you look at the decision to promote specifically Zimbabwe above Thailand, it seems unfair. And Thailand probably will find this tournament a very difficult tournament, but that's unsurprising when you think about how little preparation they've actually had in terms of matches against full member nations. So there are 2 points in terms of Thailand should have been ranked higher than they are, but also the need for a future tour schedule for below the Women's Championship for sides like Netherlands, Papua New Guinea, USA, Thailand, all of these teams. So yeah, it's a very complicated story, but I can't see a resolution coming to it anytime soon, really. We've had this WCA report, which is a big report into the future of the game, and it's had contributions from some of the most senior figures in the game. So Heather Knight and Pat Cummins have contributed to it, as well as administrative figures like Tom Harrison. And it kind of sets out a plan for the games. It doesn't mention women's cricket a ridiculous amount, does it, Ben? You've read the report. It's very long.
Yeah, it's quite long. It's 30 odd pages. It's not War and Peace.
That's long for me.
But yeah, it's not. I wouldn't say women's cricket is its focus, but some of the things, like I think one of the key things that has really held back Thailand is the structure of the ICC being basically a members club for those 12 full members, rather than a governing body that looks to administer the game for the health of the game globally. So you kind of have 12 people there who are all kind of into their own interests, and therefore also looking to kind of how they can help each other out with their own interests, rather than someone saying like, right, what do we need for cricket to be good as a whole? And that's why you get things like Zimbabwe being promoted above Thailand, and why Thailand have very little voice in world cricket to go and change things. Like, you know, you'd think that to some extent the amount of say you're allowed to have should be dictated a little bit by your performance, basically, but that is just not the case at all for Thailand. And I know that there have been calls as well for at different points for sort of a breakaway women's ICC, basically, that there are certain, you know, that it's not a priority for them as a whole. And, you know, you see that with things like this the qualified debacle back in 2021. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's answers in there exactly for Thailand's plight. And, you know, I think I'm still holding out hope that they might put up an improved showing through the rest of the tournament. I think it's possible actually that we look at Bangladesh now as just the strongest team in that, and so that with a bit of hindsight, we might be like, okay, actually, obviously Thailand got smashed, but in a way, not bad to get that out of the way first, and then that gets the rust off when you haven't played ODI cricket in a little while, and then maybe you can build into the tournament from there. And, you know, at least they have had to deal with these kind of things before. You know, they've had to deal with it throughout their whole existence as a women's cricket team, and they have found ways to compete and even, you know, beat some of the stronger full member sides in that time. So yeah, I'm still hoping that they can sort of show some resilience and put some performances in this tournament. The thing is that this is a side that, with the right nurturing, could be, you know, much further advanced than they are, rather than having to kind of scrap just to stay competitive with this sort of level of side, I guess.
Well, we'll keep a close eye on that tournament over the next week. That's all for this show. Yaz will be back next week, where we'll be looking ahead to the start of the county season.